Kate,
Yeah.
would you elaborate just a little bit more on number 5? I tend to perhaps overthink this one because I tend to be pretty relational
Mhm.
in my style, and I try to really be strategic about like connecting the right people with the right people and so forth. Could you just elaborate on when too many stakeholders is, creates perhaps more work or is not as efficient?
Yeah. So I mean, you put the nail right on the head, right? So the the more people you bring in, the more robust the conversation will be, and the slower the process will probably be, right? And so I think it does behoove you to think very strategically about who you invite and why. What part do they have a play? And so this is where that initial boundary setting and results becomes really important, right? So what's the geography and what's the criteria that we want to set? And it can be as small or as big as you want it to be. And I think the other thing that's very real is sort of the coalition of the willing, but not at the expense of ignoring important things that you just don't want to hear, right? So there's a really fine balance there as well. So I think you'll sort of feel into it. You may, in some cases, when you go big into the community, I have broken up my groups to either, and there's two strategies. One, to bring folks with great alignment together, or to mix it up and to have two really diverse groups that are, again, being informed and informing from each other. The crux of it will get, the proof of your selection will be as you start to brainstorm those results. If consistently you're finding that you're naming organizations that are part of those solutions and they're not at the table, that you've cut the list too short. And eventually you'll have to bring those folks in, because if they're part of the solution, they need to be part of that conversation.
That's helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else?
Kate, I'm curious. This is it's a very linear process. You start with, what you want, and ultimately end with, what you need to do to get there. And I'm curious, how do you adapt this to make it a cyclical process or iterative? So, what if through the process you find out that what you wanted wasn't exactly what you thought, or what if you decided through the process you want something else, or it just doesn't seem like there's that reflection piece back.
Yeah. So one of the things about RBA is that it's not a one and done. It becomes sort of the root of all your meetings and all your gatherings and all your reporting. So in some cases it can be all done at once, and you might revisit and go, oh, we need to do some adjusting to that result based on what we've heard, and you just go back up and you adjust it and then work your way through the questions. In other cases it's again multiple groups, and it's synthesizing all that information and then presenting it back to the whole group for reconsideration and affirmation. And then what happens is you're always sort of building on that conversation to go back. So it does loop back on itself. I think the most important thing about the structure is our tendency as human beings is jump right to the solutions without actually understanding what we want or the problem at hand. And then you spend a lot of time on solutions that aren't actually addressing what needs to address. So it's very intentional in really starting with the vision and what it would feel like to get to the solutions rather than starting with the solutions. You can mix and match within that. The other thing that's important to know is that baseline and story, if you don't have measures or data, you don't have to wait. You can do it based on a gut check. You can say, so in the room, here's a graph. Where do you think we are? We don't have any data. We'll try to find data that supports or not, but where are we on this? And again, that's conversational, anecdotal, and it's sort of a gut check. And then you say, and so if I were going to draw a line from where you think we are now, in the last year, 5 years, 10 years, is it getting better or worse? Is it the same? And you draw that arrow out. So again, don't let that stop you. And I know you didn't ask that question, but I'm answering it anyway. Anything else?
for a program that we're trying to revise and revigorate a bit. And we actually ran into a very good point that you just brought up is we actually got stuck in our discussion around what the gaps and the needs were, which was a good gut check for us on what problem we were trying to address. So I would say we got kind of stuck in the process. We're really at number 4 right now.
Okay.
So we haven't quite, we're still discussing sort of what's the goal of the program or what's the problem it's trying to address. So.
And do you have a plan for how to move that?
So the last time we met, we sort of left with notes, and I'm in the process of synthesizing the notes, kind of like what you were saying, and sharing them back with the group. And then we're meeting a second time in 2 weeks to allow people some room to think about, what areas or what parts of the process, provide a little bit of space for them to think about it a little bit more than just the initial gut reactions from people, I guess. So
I think that's smart, especially if, well, one, it takes into consideration your extroverts and your introverts and your different processors. So it's not a bad idea to do that first conversation and go away and come back. The other piece about this is that, and this gets back to that first question about who do you invite. If people know that decisions are being made based on this and that strategies will be selected, and the interesting part about sort of drawing that geography is to say, for this conversation alone, this is what we're talking. Doesn't mean that you're excluded forever or your strategy is bad or going to be not part of the ongoing solution, but we're narrowing our scope right now to get a real sense of this, and that might help people ease into it a little bit if fear is taken out of the equation. So I'm not sure if that's part of what's going on. I'm sorry, now my dogs are talking. Sorry. They're very sweet.
No, that's definitely helpful, because that is one thing I think people were kind of alluding to it a little bit in their questions, is that, sometimes we can get really caught up in discussion and sharing of opinions, which is an important part of this process, but somehow sort of filtering it down to actionable items and progress. So we're hoping to avoid getting stuck in a cyclical discussion arena. And I think that this process helps parse out what the next steps are. So
that's great. And it's interesting because what you're describing is the opposite of what I've just said, which is most people want to start right with the actions that they want to take and the solutions. And it seems like your group may be hesitating to land there. And so really highlighting that the idea of all ideas are welcome, and especially those low cost, no cost, wild ideas, as well as what we know works, right? We're not going to lose what works. Let's claim it all. And then there's a narrowing down of strategies for right now. It's not the only strategy ever for the rest of your lives together. It's the one that we're going to do right now. And so that, again, that gives some spaciousness to folks who might be hesitant to claim something at risk of losing other things. And it has a lot more detail on it. There's a blank side that you can sort of fill in some of your gaps. And then there's the other side has some definitions and some examples for you going forward. So you can take that with you. There's also resources in the book and on Mark's website that spells out some pretty clear examples of doing this. If you get stuck, and again, you know how to reach Beth and me, and if there's questions along the way about process or getting stuck or unstuck.